Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming, and congratulations on having staggered through to the end of the festival. You're going to be very privileged because this is a session about how to negotiate a pay rise. So you, above all your peers and colleagues, are going to be leaving this with the tools to go ahead and get a pay rise. We've commissioned a survey specifically for this session, the results of which we'll be talking about during the hour. And in addition, this is an interactive session. So we're going to ask you a few questions during the session, which we would like yes or no answers to. So please do go to the app, the festival app, and go to the Take Part section of the app. I'm going to introduce the panel, and then we're going to begin with a question which we'd like a result for. So if you could do that and be prepared for that, that would be great. But firstly, let me introduce the panel for this. To my left is Samir Shah. Samir is Chief Exec of Juniper TV. He's worked in broadcasting for over 30 years, and he was a former head of BBC Current Affairs. Next to him is Hannah Chambers. Hannah's here to represent the talent, the on-screen and talent side of the business. She's the founder and MD of Chambers Management, where she looks after comics as diverse as Jimmy Carr, Sarah Millican and Jack Whitehall. And she is very used to driving a hard bargain, and I know because I've been on the other side of those negotiations. Next to her is Ian Critchley, who's also spent over 25 years in the industry and has been responsible for editorial and talent management both in BBC commissioning and in production. And he is now a talent consultant at Sony International TV and elsewhere. And on the end is Emma Kenny, who is a TV psychologist and media commentator. And she's going to be talking to us about the psychology of negotiation. She's appeared on This Morning, Daybreak and Lorraine and many others. And quite a few American series as well, I think. So let's start with our question to all of you in the audience. And the question is, have you successfully negotiated a pay rise in the last 3 years? We'd like a yes or no answer to that. If you could please use your app to vote. Quite interesting. It looks like, in terms of gender distribution, we've got pretty equal numbers of men and women in the audience. I'm waiting to see if there's a result.
What do you reckon? 40%?
Well, interestingly, yes, 60% say yes, they have successfully negotiated a pay rise in the last 3 years, and 40% say no. So, panel, I'm going to come to you for some examples that you've experienced of good and bad negotiations. Ian, you've been involved in this world for a long while.
Good. First of all, I think it's useful when people have done some research about the shape of the business model and where they want to be. And are quite articulate about expectation. And quite often, it's not just about the money, it's the whole concept of reward. Quite often people come to talk about their pay, but what they really want to talk about is, are they being appreciated?
So you mean they just want, they're sort of searching for praise in a way?
Yeah, or reassurance.
Right.
I think. Bad example, when people march into the office and say they've been offered a job by X, Y and Z, and it's kind of like, stop it. You either stay or you go. Some people just parade other offers. I think it's a bad technique.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because you think if they found the offer that they'd got tempting enough, they would go, so they are using it as leverage.
Because actually, leaving aside the money, there's an emotional thing about, do you want, like a relationship, do you want to stay or do you want to go? And to have a Dutch auction and parade, I've been offered £5 more by company X, is really kind of unattractive, I think.
You prefer to know than not know, wouldn't you?
Hannah, you're well known for tough negotiating. What's your strategy? What?
I think it's important to know your market in terms of if I'm doing a deal for a talent, I need to know, it's my job to know what talent at that level gets for that sort of job. If I go in too high, I and the talent look ridiculous, and if I go in too low, I'm underselling. So experience and research from my point of view, is vitally important. And knowing, you know, whether undercover, talking to other agents, knowing what other acts are getting for that sort of job is vital before I do the deal. And then,
so research properly before you go in and know
and also
where you want to end up.
All us agents, we think that maybe our act is the best in that level, but ultimately know the status of that act and know that they're not as big as so-and-so, so therefore don't pitch them as big at that level. Be realistic. I think it's much easier for an agent to know the status of their act than for someone to know their own status. We would tend to either overinflate or underinflate our status, whereas someone who's very close to you can go, no, you're of that position.
I guess it's fine if it's transparent, isn't it? If you know. I mean, the difficulty is where you're not sure maybe what your peers are earning and what...
They don't know, but us agents should know. That's our job to know.
And are you as good at negotiating for yourself as you are for other people?
I'm absolutely terrible at negotiating for myself. And in fact, I have to negotiate my staff's pay, and I hate it more than anything else. I can't wait to get them out of the room as quickly as possible, and I agree to things I don't want to agree to, and none of my staff are here, but I hate it. And so I actually sympathise hugely with people that have to negotiate their own salary.
Is that because...
Because it's basically I'm arguing on my behalf and about how much do I keep. And that's, I mean, we'll probably talk about that more, but then there's something in me, some Britishness in me that makes me feel uncomfortable. I have no problem doing it about someone else.
That's
I
interesting.
feel much the same. I feel like the cobbler's child. I'm in other people's shoes, but not my own.
Yeah.
And it's quite hard.
Samir, you run a company as well. Do you have the same sort of distaste for it as Hannah does?
I don't have the choice, but I'll talk about it from on the other side of the table, as it were. For me, there are three big drivers. One is for an independent company, it's the budget I have. That's one of the biggest drivers, what kind of pay I can afford to pay. Second is supply and demand, just how unique are you as an individual coming to work here. And finally, what's your risk appetite? How much do we want you? How much do you want us? And you have to think about those three things if you're looking to negotiate a pay rise with me. All three factors really matter.
Emma, that risk thing is really interesting, isn't it? Because that's a psychological... We're going to come on to the gender differences, but I know that it's a particular female trait to think, oh, I don't want to push it too far, because actually maybe they don't want me. They might not want me in the end if I push myself too far. But what Samir's saying in a way is you have to work out what your risk kind of factor is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that the research evidence is what we all know, which is actually women probably feel that way because, to be fair, the industry doesn't reflect their worth in the way it should do. That's primarily an issue. But when it comes down to how you negotiate and how you deal with that feeling, first of all, know your worth. So recognise what your job is, what you do, how you fulfil the roles and responsibilities in comparison to other people. Also, know that you're willing to walk away. Never try and negotiate in a deal if you're not going to walk, because essentially what you said's true, that if you walk in and say another 15 people want me and your boss goes, well, my budget doesn't extend to that, you have to be willing to walk away. So know that you have that option. But also, make sure that you're prepared. It's amazing. I'm a CEO of a company. I have people asking me for wage raises. And as long as they're coming to me with a really, really clear objective as to tell me why I need them, it costs me a lot of money to retrain staff. It costs me a lot of money to lose staff. So actually, if you can give me a really good, honest dialogue explaining and expressing why I need you, I'm going to listen, because I don't want you to walk away. It costs me too much. So I think emotionally, potentially, what you said is true. Women, maybe because we're stereotypically defined as nurturers and carers, and men earn more than us and men are more assertive than us. You go in kind of with your cap bowed, and you shouldn't. You should be aware of your intrinsic self-worth and your capabilities and be willing to walk away from people who don't take you seriously. And I think probably that's the biggest message for women out there right now. This is really unfair. We are not being demonstrated effectively in the workplace, and it's time that we started to shout loud enough till we get heard to get the wage that we deserve.
We'll come on a bit to the gender differences that were revealed by the survey, but I'm not going to talk specifically through some of these results, but they're obviously up there for everybody to see. And the levels of pay generally in broadcasting, it's obviously been particularly focused around the BBC, this notion about should you be earning more than the Prime Minister if you're in a public service organisation. Do we sort of feel that we've got levels of pay right in the industry? I mean, an exec producer probably earns more than a GP or a head teacher these days. Does that feel right, Samir? Does that feel...
When I first saw the results, I was surprised at how high the average figure was, because that seemed to be a rather good average salary, looking at other professions. I think it is about right. I think if there's a problem, it may be that entry-level people increasingly get very, particularly if you work in London, the entry-level wages are very low.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. I know a number of the young 20-somethings who work at Juniper. I find it really difficult, to work, and we need to pay travel. I was asking them actually, and they said, travel expenses, lunch expenses really matter, really matter at that level, and we do it. And initially,
So you do that on top of the pay package?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I didn't quite sort of believe it, but in fact, it's true because they come from a long way away to work. Well, my office is in London Bridge, so I think that matters. So I think there's a problem at the low level. I don't think there is a problem once you get to that 50, 60, 70,000. Frankly, if you think that's a problem, you're not in the real world. That is a pretty good salary. Maybe there's some people who earn a very large amount of money, but I don't think that many.
But do you think it's different at the BBC? Do you think because it's a publicly funded?
Well, I think the BBC. There's some people at the top of the BBC who earn what they deserve. I think there's a level below the very top. I'm not convinced that they are being paid a market rate. I think if they were out in the market, whether they get the same rate, I'm not sure.
I was telling an anecdote earlier about somebody I knew who'd had a defection from their independent company to the BBC and was shocked at the amount of money the BBC were offering this particular person. Ian, do you think...
I mean, I used to try and tempt people to the BBC, and it was never about money, it was about creative challenge. But people were always shocked by how little, at the senior level, they were going to take a big loss, and people understood that. But what I did find, picking up on your point, it's not just about money, it's about the smaller things.
Yeah, I mean, I think
for some of the runners at one of the Sony companies, we give them breakfast every day. Yeah. This sounds like a small thing, it's a big thing. It's like a ribbon on a gift. And
the BBC has to be competitive, doesn't it? As much as the big issue is, are women and men paid the same? That's a separate issue. That should absolutely be the case at those levels. But as a competitive agency, you have to be competitive. So if you've got indies who are paying large amounts of money because they've got amazing talent who can create amazing shows which create amazing amounts of money in return, then the BBC, like it or otherwise, whether it's owned by the actual general public or otherwise, needs to be competitive. So that demonstrates why there are such high figures.
I mean, it's crystallising, Ian, a bit over the privatisation of BBC Studios, isn't it? Do you think they'll be able to compete properly in the marketplace? Or do you think they'll inflate the...
I think they're going to be stymied because for about 2 years they won't be able to do anything. The formal process at the BBC is to go to a committee called REMCO, which I used to go to on a weekly basis, to make a case to get people's pay rises. They're really, unless they're free from that, I don't think they're going to be able to operate commercially very quickly.
Well, let's go on to the gender pay differences. The Guardian this week, and again today, I don't know if people saw in The Guardian, there was I think it's Forbes magazine has revealed the top earners in Hollywood and the gap between male stars and female stars, and there was an earlier report this week, and of course it also corroborates what our survey has shown, which is that women earn 18% less than men. And that pay gap really balloons after women have children to around 33%. And you may think broadcasting is different as a profession because we're a modern liberal organisation, industry, but think again. Let's have a look at this, VT. So here are our stats on the gender pay gap. So Robin Wright there, House of Cards, which explains why the music was over it, demanded parity with Kevin Spacey quite notoriously, publicly shaming. But that is a bold and brave thing to do. I think as an employer it's very difficult, isn't it? Especially if you're running a commercial organisation, because if women don't ask, it's hard to volunteer it. Samir, do you find men and women are paid differently?
Well, this is really interesting. I think my experience at Juniper certainly does not reflect this. That may be because I have a small company and I'm across all the people who work there. And And I have the most senior people in my team, running teams, are women, and they get paid absolutely the same. I am shocked by this statistic. I can't understand how anybody could not pay the same. I don't understand what gender's got to do with it. And this idea that somehow people should be paid differently. It doesn't happen at Juniper. It obviously happens elsewhere.
Everyone's applying for a job at Juniper right now.
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing.
But also, again, maybe it's just the kind of people that work. I haven't found them being less not coming forward and asking for it.
Ian, why do you think it?
Well, I think there are several things really. I think there's a sense, and this sounds slightly sexist, in negotiating with a woman, that there's a sense of gratitude and relief that there's a job available, particularly if they've just come back from maternity leave or something. With men, it's different, and pay is the practical manifestation of your worth in an organisation. So, I think
perception in society is that whether we like it or not, and whether we're all educated and we have an equal opinion of each other, look, it doesn't happen. It's not reflected in society. Women are not treated equally to men. Women are not paid the same as men. And it's not, it's not just in TV. It's throughout all high-level jobs. Yeah. And the problem is the schema that's attached to the perception of women. And, we do say women are nurturers. We do see that women have all these soft qualities. But actually, women are as ballsy and as assertive and as confident as men. The problem is that the perception isn't that way. So you walk into a meeting and potentially the person that you're negotiating with sees you differently. That's the problem. So what was said in there is true. It needs to come from the head down to a degree. People need to start acknowledging in high management and senior corporate environments that women can do the jobs even when we've been off on maternity leave.
I think there was a statistic, wasn't there, that 70% felt embarrassed asking for a pay rise. I think also women the Guardian report was saying that women also start off feeling nervous about making too many demands because the expectation is they may need flexibility later. They expect to have a baby. Yeah. They therefore want some flexible working hours, and they don't want to sort of rock the boat too much. So I think that's probably part of it. I also think, in my experience, that women get labelled, and those labels are particularly gender-based. So, she's difficult to work with, she's abrasive, and that pushing yourself forward and making demands might lead to you getting those labels. Do you agree with that?
I think that's true, because if a man is kind of ballsy, it's kind of like, God, he's really strong and interesting. But if the female does the same thing, it's kind of louche behaviour somehow.
Hannah, is it true? Is it true in your world?
I think it is a bit. I think for sort of newer middle level female talent, the offers that come in are definitely lower than a man at the same level. And the feeling, I suppose, is that maybe that these women they need the work more, maybe, to get to that top level. And my job very much is to go, I know that a man with the same experience is getting paid that, you need to match it. My female clients often don't push the fee up as much. They don't feel, they don't push me to get the fee up in the same way. It's often me saying, no, you need to get more, you need to be paid more. But at the top level, when someone is when a female star, I have complete equality, and I think it's because there's a recognised feeling amongst people offering deals that they've reached that level and they are equivalent. But I do think that this goes back to why there's fewer female talent on TV, is because in a way I think there's an expectation that women have to sort of undersell and jump through hoops to get to that next level. Some are more willing to do that than others. I feel very passionate about equality. I have a lot of, most of my office is women. I've got quite a few female clients. I feel very passionate that a woman should be booked on something, but they should be booked on their worth, not because they're a woman. It gets me quite riled often. This is not actually hugely relevant, but I often get the email or the call saying, we need a woman. We need a woman. And I go, well, you know my female clients, can you ask them by name? If you ask for my male clients by name, can you do the same? And it's the token woman because they know that they'll be criticised.
Panel show. Yeah.
Normally panel shows, and that's something that riles me. And then often the first offer that comes in is lower than the man's getting. and we'll get it up, but then they'll go, but we've given you a 25% increase. I go, yeah, but the starting point was lower, and therefore your 25% increase doesn't actually equate to the same. And I have at times accepted a lower amount because I want my female client to get up the next ladder, up the ladder. And that does rile me.
I think what I do recognise, though, the outcome is, or is equality, is this idea that if women push for something, there's a sense that they're being aggressive. And it's just not just about equal pay, it's about even if you sit around a table discussing ideas, that sense that women being tough and aggressive is kind of not as good as, it's not seen in the same light as men being tough and aggressive. I do recognise that.
It's not
I think
equality
that
that's...
I was called aggressive in my introduction, which I had no problem with at all. But I think if I was a man, I may
didn't
not.
call you aggressive.
No, it's fine. I know you didn't write it, but no. What's interesting is but I don't think that men are called that in the same way. I think because I stand out as
There
being
is something-
opinionated.
there is something
I
to
wasn't
that,
insulted at
I
all,
think.
though.
I didn't call you aggressive.
No, did you not?
No.
Someone else
Definitely
tough.
not.
Tough.
You were a
Sorry,
tough
you didn't.
negotiator.
Sorry, but
Tough negotiator,
But
I
I
said.
do get told that I'm aggressive.
Yeah,
And
no, I know it's a label that often gets attributed
no, I
to...
recognise
Yeah,
that.
I have no problem.
But
with
I must say from my own experiences in, direct reports who are both male and female, I mean, when you, at the end of the year doing kind of PDRs, quite often the men come in and go, well, obviously I've had a great year and I'm sure you're going to pay me my bonus and I'm, expecting a bit more than my bonus actually and the women come in and go, oh, I know that series didn't quite get the ratings we expected and says, don't worry about the bonus. It's kind of, I mean, it is extraordinarily different how
There's a
how
lot of
they
research
approach
in psychology that says that you only have to be a tall, relatively good-looking white man and you'll do well in life. So basically you can be pretty stupid and still succeed if you fit that. No disrespect if anybody's tall, white and good-looking and male in here, but that is the way it goes. And unfortunately, attitudes and stereotypes, we all know they have a bearing on the way we behave and also the way that people behave towards us.
Well,
But
that's
Ian,
true,
it's
but I mean, I do
surprising
think
in
it's-
broadcasting, isn't it, that we regard ourselves as a sort of a modern liberal media.
Well, I think
that
there's a
these
veneer.
are still.
There's a veneer of that, but I mean, in the end, it's a business, and it just reflects what happens in society. So I had lunch yesterday with a lady friend, and when the bill came, the bill was given to me, and she was paying, and that's just emblematic
Yes.
of how life is. So I would say on a more positive note, I think it is getting better, despite those results on that survey. At least it's being talked about. I did some work with Andrew Chowns from Directors UK, looking at rates for female directors, and it was appalling, wasn't it, Andrew? The research we did just indicated that women were being paid less, generally.
You say it's getting better, but obviously the statistics are still not great. What can we do about it? What should we be doing about it? How do we get this corrected? I mean, obviously there's the Robin Wright example but it does require a certain kind of boldness to do and confidence.
I think it boils down to confidence, and I think that it starts at a very young age. I think that girls at school and university should be encouraged to speak up and know their worth. I said to my 5-year-old daughter a few days ago, I said to her, would you like to work for me one day? And she said, no, you'll work for me. And I was over the moon. I thought she's got a confidence that a lot of girls don't have. And I think it starts young, and I think that's where we should be encouraging it, because I think it's important that women know that they are equivalent, often better. I mean, sometimes not, but certainly equivalent. And I think that that's where it starts, because you can't walk into a room, expect to get a pay rise if you're constantly thinking, I'm not really deserving this. I think that's where, it's not the only problem. I think it needs to come as well from the top down as well. But I think the problem can't be solved with one solution. I think it has to be solved by several.
So let's ask the audience, if you could go back to your app, if you're female, do you believe you're being paid less than men who are doing the same job? And we'll see what the result of that is. I mean, this is, of course, assuming this transparency issue is still the key thing, isn't it? You need to know. It's much easier if things are published and you're aware of what the comparisons are.
Can I add something as well? Sorry, was you in the middle?
Well, the answer's just coming through, sorry. So, yes, so 69% of women think that they are being paid less than men in this room. Wow. Which is quite, so there's a resounding Yes. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Only vaguely relevant. When I was starting out, a comedian called up to negotiate his deal, pretending to be his own agent, and
That is quite funny.
yeah, it is.
quite funny.
And it made me laugh at the time. I thought, you've got real chutzpah. But I did think that it's a good technique for actually to think, if you were negotiating on your own behalf and not directly, how would you talk about yourself and how would you sell yourself? What do you think you deserve? And I think to go into that third person in your head, even not you know, you'd look a bit mental if you walked into the room and pretended you were someone else. But it is an interesting.
No, it's true.
It's an interesting technique, maybe.
Psychologically, Emma, do you think
Yeah.
that's a good kind of
Yeah.
to slightly lift the
Yeah.
personal out of it?
Always. I mean, in every situation that isn't, you know, just with your intimate, close people that you can completely be insane with, you know, for any other intents and purposes, play a role in those circumstances. What you said a minute ago was really interesting about girls particularly being educated. I think that's a bigger question, probably we'll come on to it. But one of the big problems is that we're all in this room educated, clever, because we've had potentially education accessible to us. You know, even somebody like myself, working class, from you know, poor background, has managed to achieve. But I'm wondering how many girls out there, you know, Sunderland, Middlesbrough, Hull, Wythenshawe, places that I've had the privilege of working, would even begin to know where the confidence comes to access jobs that we're going to be in and education systems that are going to give them the confidence. I think there's a wider question about women per se, which is when you say from the top down, right now the top says that even in educated circles, 69%, you just did that straw survey then, aren't being paid in their imaginations, you know, as much as their male counterparts being paid. Imagine what that's like, the gravity of that extends when you're talking about on council estates in areas where, you know, third generation not schooled. I mean, that's a scary concept when we can't, in our privileged, educated states, even command what men get. No disrespect to the men in the room who
Can
pay.
I just make an observation? It's about pay rises and how, just reflecting on how the company gives pay rises. One of the things that strikes me about, again, at the more junior levels, is that looking back on one or two people who've had pay rises, that's because they have added further value to the company. In other words, one of them, I think, particularly learned how to shoot and how to edit, and that enabled me to take a bit of that line out of a budget and gave them that. So this idea that you come in as a researcher, say, but nowadays researchers, in my view, do lots of different things. They're multi-skilled, and if you can learn new skills, and therefore, you told me we were talking about research. Look at how the company works. And you say, well, actually, there's a budget line that goes to editing or goes to shooting, and you do a bit of that, you learn that. And we've trained a few people to do that. But interesting enough, I would say the people who've come in and said, can we go on a day's shooting or a day's editing course, have been men. I don't think...
But that is
I
a
don't
different...
think a woman has come to us and saying, oh, I'd like how to learn how to shoot. Having learned how to shoot, they may come back and say, well, look, can I have a pay rise because I can do this bit? I then have a line to give them. I can't just give people a pay rise because they want it. You know, there's a budget here.
But that's a really key point, isn't it, Ian? Because some of the women in this room, the 69% who think they're being paid less than men who do the same job, and in a sense, they want to go in and ask for a pay rise, not because they're adding value or they've got a new skill, but simply because they want to be paid the same as the men. Yes. And that is the very difficult ask, isn't it? Because you were saying, do your research, make it clear what you're offering, you need to be offering something. But actually, lots of women just simply want to go in and say, I want a pay rise just because I want to be paid. I'm not offering any, I'm not doing a different job, I'm not doing more hours, I haven't got a new skill, I just want to be paid the same as men. And that's what's not happening, and that's a difficult thing to go in and do,
I think it's a
isn't
difficult thing, and I get lots of calls from women who want me to negotiate their fee for them. I think it's also worth putting out the external landscape. The average salary in the UK is now 26,500. In TV, it's a much richer zone, really. And the other thing to say is 85% of the people who work in production are freelance, so it's not a salary, it's a fee. It's a different kind of currency. And the plus side
But nonetheless, the same thing should apply, which is there should be no gender difference, should there?
No, but at least it gives
of
an
whether.
opportunity for people to discuss their rate.
Yes.
Whereas if you're on a kind of staff
Oh, I see what you mean.
continuing contract, you're kind of married, aren't you? It's not a one-night stand, to put it crudely.
So, our survey, surprise, surprise, also revealed that there is a discrepancy in class. So, what is still quite surprising is a third of the people working in our industry went to private or selective grammar schools, which is 3 times the national average. Let's have a look at another VT. So we pay middle class, middle-aged men more than women, and it seems we discriminate against working class and diverse
I think that's true.
ethnic minorities.
On Tuesday and Wednesday of this week, I spent a lot of time seeing networkers, so the young kids who want to get into TV. And I saw one girl from Sheffield, and her CV looked pretty ordinary. And as she got up to leave, I said, "Oh, how do you pay your rent?" And she said, "Oh, I'm a checkout girl at Tesco." And I said, "Put that on your CV, because that makes you feel different." And her reply was, "The thing is, all the people on this scheme, they're a bit posh, so I thought I'd try and be posh." And I just thought that was touching and sad in a way.
It's
And kind
interesting.
of interesting.
It's also realistic though, isn't it? I mean, let's be completely honest. It is still the old boys network in loads of areas. Anywhere where there's wealth and success, that's the way it goes. You know, who's reaching out? I've never ever met one television individual in the 10 years I've worked in it who's gone to a really, really difficult PRU and sat with kids who maybe can't read and write as well as their peers in other schools and said to them, "We want to hear what you think. We believe that you're hungry. We believe you're creative." These kids don't even begin to imagine you care. And to be fair, that's because you don't. And that's, sorry, when it comes down to it, for the most part, you don't. You don't care about those kids.
Samir, do you think it's right that we're just sort of self-selecting from the group of, you know, we choose to employ people who look and sound a bit like us, and that, you know, we
Well, I
don't...
don't think it's right. I think we do, and I think that we've been doing it for a very long time.
Yeah.
You know, Lucy said something which I think is really important, because I have a real problem with all these equal opportunity schemes that try and improve it. I think the problem lies with, she said, with the ones with the power. I think that's where it lies, not with the people who are being interviewed, but the interviewers. And they're the ones who need to change. In my view, the only thing that makes that difference is if the people at the top proactively demand that change. Just demand it. Unless you believe that, you know, ethnic minorities, working class people, people who go to comprehensive schools are all stupid and idiotic, then if you demand it, you will find the good ones who work. And unless you demand it, it'll never happen. I remember when I was at Current Affairs, I was Tim Gardner was the editor of Panorama. It had a white team. I said to Tim, within the end of the year, you're going to have a black reporter and 2 black producers. Just find it. Just do it. Make it happen. And he did, and they were terrific. You know, it has to come from the people in power. It's got to be a demand. It doesn't need any schemes. They're all good enough. Just, if you look, you'll find. And
So
you need an insistence at the top to change it. And if the top doesn't care, it's not going to happen.
So you're not... So obviously there've been a lot of recent initiatives around diversity. You're not impressed with it?
Look, the problem is not with the people coming up to being interviewed. The problem is the people who are doing the interview. All these initiatives and schemes are about them as if there's something not quite right with them. They're not kind of skilled enough. They're not tall enough. They're not white enough. They're not blonde enough. Actually, that's not what the problem is. The problem is the people who are doing the interviews. That's where the problem lies. If you could have some equal opportunity schemes for the interviewers, that might be something. But really, unless you believe that this class that I ignored just don't have the talent, which you could do, I suppose, you know, you could do that. The only way to change it is if the guy or the woman who's the boss of those people in the interview insist on it and make it happen and make it part of their bonuses or whatever you want to do. Or actually just tell them, which is what I've done. I've just told them, you will not have, we live in London, we will not have a white team working on any of my programs. We just won't. It's not going to happen because I insist on it. It's not going to be all male because I insist on it. That means the people who are doing the recruitment just have to find the woman.
But you're not. You're probably quite unique in that, and these
Well,
initiatives probably are forcing.
But what I'm saying is that it happens. When I was at the BBC, when I was the head of Current Affairs, I insisted on it. The moment I left, Panorama was white again.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
exactly.
that's how it
Scary.
happens. Unless the people in power insist on it and demand it of the people making the decisions, it's not going to happen. I'm afraid the
But what
experience of the
about
last 30 years is they don't.
No, it's it. Well, but
think
what
you're
about
right.
the class thing, though, Samir? Because in some ways it's even harder
Yeah,
to
I
get
know.
into the industry if you're a white working class boy from Sunderland.
Yeah, because how do you pay your rent in a freelance world?
This
You
is
know, it's
it.
much better if you call Lucy and you come from Bristol, or you know, your parents are connected into that world. But I think for white working class people, and that's my background, they don't even think it's a world that they're allowed to enter. So
I think at school level and university level, in terms of getting career advice, it's not that high up. You know, if you're speaking to a creative person at school, they should be thinking about a job in TV, and it should be on this. But I don't believe it is. I mean, I remember there was tree surgeon was one of the things that was offered as a career suggestion at school, which is a ridiculous thing. But the fact
you must have gone to a fancy school.
Yeah,
Tree
well-
surgeon, blimey.
Yeah, but I think it needs to start earlier. That
Yeah,
people
what
are.
you're saying is true in the fact that people have to really want it at the top, because it's so sad, because out there are these huddles of young people who have got burning desires without an activation opportunity. They can't come to London, it's not going to happen. There's absolutely no way. The mum and dad can't afford it, they can't afford it, and the banks aren't going to loan and payroll kids who don't go to university, for example. It's how we as a society start to accept and acknowledge that there are these disenfranchised communities that we exclude, and we exclude on the basis of class, gender, ethnicity, and so many other variables that mean that when it comes down to it, the majority employer is in London, the majority employer is to white people, and the majority employer is to men. And that's real
You know,
in
I think that
2016.
we can't write society's oaths in television, but I was a great supporter, and I'm a great supporter of the movement to Salford. And I think the movement
Yeah.
of time and money, the two big currencies in broadcasting, money and airtime, most of that lies in London. It needs to move out of London, and you know,
Yeah.
channels need to be in Manchester and Newcastle, and that way it'll start changing. You can't, you know, I have one person working for me who comes from Burnley. It's really hard. We can't fix the London housing market.
No.
But, you know, we can move our broadcasting power bases, the people who control
Yeah.
things, control airtime, control money, up outside London, because there's talent there as well. Unless you happen to think they're all not talented, they're all in London. Move that, which is why
But
I'm
Salford
supportive.
hasn't.
But it's interesting because
Hasn't-
Salford, you know, moving to the north, social engineering really hasn't worked. I'm sorry,
Yeah, I
Peter
know.
Salmon, if you're in the room, but it really hasn't.
So what, but
And that's
what went
because
wrong?
why?
Why
Because-
didn't it? Because
Well, what went wrong is that loads of people moved up from London and now work for the BBC on staff contracts. The I forgot what the percentage is, but it's small.
But Samir would argue that not enough power moved up. That
power
there
that needs
wasn't
to
go
kind
up,
of
you
a
see.
channel or a
Yeah.
commissioning power.
And there
I
are...
mean, this is very specifically BBC, but of course the ITV
Yes.
franchises all disappeared as well. So Granada
course.
and Yorkshire and
It's interesting,
similar
we
sort of
weren't
platform.
that concerned with it, but back when I started back in the early 80s, there was, of course, ITV was a load of regional
Exactly.
things, and I'd be interested to know whether there was a class difference then, people who worked for Yorkshire,
Might have
or
been a
worked
different
for Tyne
portrait,
Tees, or
yeah.
whether
Well, I
it's
used to work for
different.
Granada. I think it was different. I mean,
Was-
the social climate was different. Everyone had a staff contract. The casualisation of labour really hadn't started, you know, 25
No, but
years
if there was Tyne Tees now, and Yorkshire
Oh, yeah,
now,
okay.
and Grampian, there would be a wider class mix, I would have thought.
Yeah.
We just need to move the power up there. All the power is still massively concentrated in London.
So I think 81% of people in TV live in England and 55% live in London.
In London.
But that is, of course, because that's where the concentration of power is. Hannah, is this also a problem in...
It's less of a problem in live comedy, because there's, I mean, the comedy scene is I mean, it's slightly more London centric, but actually it's beautifully spread across the country. It travels brilliantly. There's a very good representation of social classes, ethnic backgrounds. I think it's a pretty good setup we've got there. The issue is a lot of that talent going onto TV, and that's where we have the issue, is that whilst there's a lot of attempts right now to give certain talent a leg up, I don't think it's been done quite rightly. I think that there needs to be more opportunity for these underrepresented people to learn their craft and become stars, rather than saying, "Go on, you do that because we haven't got a black person on this show. Stick them in there." And you go, but they haven't had the right experience to actually shine. They'll do that. They won't necessarily be ready, and they'll get written off. It's about giving them the support at all levels and saying, we need to build our future stars, we need to build our future people in TV, but we need to give them the support at all levels. And TV, I think, rather than sort of some people in TV going, this, you know what, we need to tick some boxes. That doesn't feel right. I think from the top, I think the mentality needs to change. I think exactly as you're saying, it needs to come from the top, that we need to view England as it is, as opposed to a privileged white, London-centric, middle-class.
Yes, I think
setup.
that one of the myths that goes around is that somehow all the people at the top, you know, because they've not been chosen other than the best candidate, there's a myth about the concept of the best candidate, because I've sat on big executive boards, there are loads of people there who I don't think are cut it at all, but they somehow manage to work the system, so they're there. But the idea they're the best people in that job is bollocks. They're not, you know. And I think there are loads of good candidates who are not there because they don't work the system as well, which is why I profoundly believe that the talent is out there. I think maybe on-screen talent is different. I'm thinking about the people behind. Talent out there, and if you look, you'll find them. Because the people who get there are the ones who work the system.
So talking about the sort of decentralisation away from London, I'd just like to ask the audience, if you can go back to your apps, which region of the UK do you live in? There are choices for you, so we should get an overall result. But it is tricky to. I remember when I was looking after the Edinburgh Television Festival and talking to the networkers, and obviously there was a high preponderance of them coming from outside London, and obviously the festival pays for them to be at the festival, but trying to secure them positions beyond that or work experience when they could just not afford to be in London.
Exactly.
It was very hard to sustain it.
Initiatives are great, but it's the sustainability that's important. So I think it's better to do one big thing that's sustainable rather than having lots of initiatives which just tick a box, really. Okay,
so the result of the poll in this room is that 70% of us live in London, South East England. So with so much of the TV industry in London, access is going to be key. So let's have a look at our next VT, which is about how we can get our first break. It's tough. This was your point, Ian, that people don't really realise it's a freelance industry now.
For some of the networkers, I had to explain the business model, which sounds a dull thing to do, to explain what it's like, because there's a thought that it's going to be a very glamorous career for life, and it's not quite a career, really. I mean, the culture is closer to theatre than it is to this manufacturing in Stuttgart, because it's freelance and you get booked for a gig, not forever.
Samir, do you have work experience?
We do, yes, and you know, I think the casualisation of labour has made all this much, much worse and much more dependent. I mean, we are quite often an entry point for people who have their first job in television, and we do things that actually, like your report says, you know, we recruit people through websites that, you know, first job in TV, we recruit people who just write to us just because they're at universities. I mean, we just quite like the tone of the letter. We also have good relations with local colleges and education centres, and somebody comes to work with us and they sometimes go on. And of course, we also have people, I mean, I think the children of all my friends have worked at Juniper. You know, it happens, that's the way it is. I can't say no to them, but I'd make a distinction because in the 18 years, I suspect most of the children of my friends have had work experience at Juniper. Only 2 have actually gone on to careers in television. So, you know, the work experience thing of saying, well, do I like television or not? I mean, quite a lot have come through it. They've had 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then they've gone. And but 2 have stayed. So I think you could overstate just how much, you know, your friends actually end up being in television. But we do, again, this is the place where you need to be proactive, whether it's on the website, on Talent Manager, First Job. It's always when we ring up. We were recruiting for a researcher on a show that goes out for South East. My HR rang up the head of journalism at Brighton College and said, who are your best people? And we looked at people from there. And then again, you looked at the makeup of the team. You know, you do recruit, but you have to just look at what you've got and make sure that you don't end up with a particular cultural class group. You really have to try. The default position will be middle class, independent, white males. That would be the default. So you always have to actively say, well, are there people, I mean, we do make the conversation, call to colleges and say, well, have you got anything beyond that? So that we have a proper mix. But unless you look at that, if you just sit back, you'll get what we have at the moment. I fear that in all these ways of recruiting, people aren't active enough to filter through and look for people. Because I mean,
And again, if there aren't enough positions outside of London, it's going to
There's
be...
two conversations there, isn't there? There's a conversation of, one, how accessible is television, making it possible for young people from excluded groups of, of communities to engage, because the truth is that, like you said, even then, college or university, let's put it on the board, and the majority of young people aren't going there. That doesn't mean that their ideas and their passions and their capabilities and their intrinsic self-worth isn't good enough to be an amazing contributor in television, behind the scenes or on screen. So there's that side of it. And then there's the barriers that were so poignantly said at the end there, where basically, if you live outside London, if your mum and dad aren't rich, if you don't know the director, and so on and so forth, basically you're not going to get into TV. I mean, how dreadful is it that we're even having this conversation, And I am somebody who's been fortunate enough to get into both sides, presenting and behind scenes. But I'm not stupid. In Manchester, let me tell you, it's a completely different situation than in London. Like in Manchester, ordinary kids do get to go running. Ordinary kids do get the experience there. In London, I don't see that. I don't see it because mums and dads are looking after the kids. Understandably, that's what mums and dads do. But how do we have a conversation that's on the table, not just ticking boxes, not just nodding our heads, not just listening to each other going, oh, this is a big problem. This is a problem. We've known about it for a long time. Why are we still having this conversation? Yeah. And what are we going to do to change that conversation? I don't want to be here another 15 years thinking, yeah, nothing's changed.
So, look, we've only got a few minutes left. I just want to send everybody on their way with the tools and the strategies to try themselves and make these things better. I wondered if you could each give us a sort of tip for either addressing the gender pay balance or if you prefer, for trying to kind of make the workforce more diverse and less mirroring what we all feel we see when we look at ourselves. Samir, what would be your one tip?
Well, what I'd say is that people wanting to break into television, so into Juniper, first thing you need to do the research, find out about the company, what we do, and be sensible in what you're looking for. But the two qualities I always look for, everybody looks for, are brains and enthusiasm. Get that across, because that's what we need. And that's, and everybody's got, of different classes, genders, races, have all got brains and enthusiasm.
Hannah, in terms of negotiation, what would be your key?
I would say, know the market and know where you sit in that market, and in your head pretend to be your own agent.
Yes.
And I suppose don't over and don't undersell. I think they're both extremes are going to end up badly. So really do your research well.
Ian?
I think charm works better than aggression. Sulky behaviour is really unpalatable for both parties. And I think it's also worth just thinking about whether you want jam today or jam tomorrow. What is a longer term thing that you want? Either it's about money or it's about career development.
And it was an interesting point you made earlier, that sometimes you think it's less about pay than it is about reward. So I suppose as employers, people need to think about creating enough moments where people do get that recognition so that they don't have to kind of cause it themselves.
And sometimes when you're negotiating, maybe help the person you're negotiating with, because they may not be able to do anything, but suggesting things like flexible working or more holiday or, I don't know, just small things.
There may be other ways of,
sometimes.
Yes. And Emma?
Everything they've said. But also just know your worth consistently. Always be very aware of how capable you are and be able to evidence that. And then just on a practical note, psychological research says that if you ask for a really odd figure, you're a lot more likely to get it. So don't go in saying, I want an extra 2,000. Go in saying, I want an extra £1,865. And
really?
We
God.
just
now
like those weird numbers.
I think that would appeal to the BBC. They like the minutiae.
We like it. And also, like I said earlier on, just on a stimulant level, coffee has actually been shown to be really effective when going into negotiate a pay rise. Don't have 18
What do you mean? You
espressos.
take somebody else a coffee?
And actually, no, it's funny though, what you just said then actually is true, and building on what you said, make them do the work. So it's really good to go in with questions such as, how do you think I'm doing? What do you think my, exponentially effective features were on the last series I did? Make them work. And then at the end of it say, and that's why I want this.
I get what you're
This
saying.
very odd figure I'm
Whilst
about to
passing
come up
them
with.
coffee and shoving them a 1,000.
Coffee, odd figure. Yeah.
But if someone
There's-
came to me and said they wanted a pay rise of £1,937, I think they're slightly mad.
Well, that's good. That's good. That makes you
Yeah, we'll have
question.
No, because you might just say, okay, I'll make it do.
Yeah, but in your case, they've just been nice to you and you've gone, okay, then you can have it.
Yeah. Thank you all very, very much. And thank you to you for participating in the interactivity. I'd just like to thank the sponsors, Future Thinking, who came up with the survey for us. And I think the survey in detail can be seen on the app and online. So thank you all very much. I hope you've all had a great festival. And thanks to our panellists again. Thank you.
Thank you.